Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the studio. Today we're talking about the stash again. And I am standing in front of, this is actually a pretty dark corner here in the studio. And this is where I have my seed bead collection. You're only looking at a small part of it. I made this rack years ago and it starts way up at the ceiling and it goes all the way down to the floor, and it's all these different glass beads. Everything is very neatly organized by size and by color, but it's a ridiculous collection that I almost never use. So yeah, it's pretty, but what good is that for me? I mean, right, it's taking up a lot of space, but I never use it. So I thought I'd show you that I'm really bad too. And I think that's the thing, right? We have all this stuff and we don't use it. Since posting the first two parts of this series, and I'm only going to do 4 posts about this, I've gotten a lot of comments on all the different platforms. And I think one of the really unfortunate things is that people feel really sad or some guilt about their collections of art materials. And it was never my intention to do that. And I don't think you should have any kind of negative emotions about this. In fact, it's important to just sort of get rid of all of those emotions. And we need to look at what we have and think about it in a little more critical way, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I didn't want you to feel bad or guilty or sad. You've got all this stuff, and that's great. Okay, so what's next? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So you have whatever it is. Maybe you're like me. So I am a textile artist and I have a stupid, crazy big collection of fabric. I have bins over there, I have shelves over there, I have stuff in my car. People are always giving me new stuff, so it's a lot. But then I also have things that I use to embellish my work. So I have beads that I never use. So I have some paints. Since I do doll work, I have boxes of weirdo things, old jewelry, broken watches, little weirdo metal pieces, ribbons, lace, all of this sort of stuff. So I have a lot of different kinds of things. It generally fits into the category of textile stuff, right? So I don't know what kind of work you do. Maybe you do clay. Maybe you're a painter. Maybe you do mixed media. Whatever it is, the first thing that we all need to do when we're thinking about our stash, our collection, is take an inventory. Now, actually, I do this every year. I do a big studio cleanup after the holidays and before the new year, just to sort of get rid of everything. I get rid of old inventory. I have a big sale and I take stuff out and I reorganize it, and some things I wash, and I clean the whole studio because doing fabric work is very dusty. So I do a big reorganization inventory, and that's not necessarily what I'm talking about for you. What I think we all need to do as a first step in thinking about what's going to happen to all of our stuff is to know what we have. So when I say take an inventory, I don't mean that you should go and measure every piece of fabric and weigh every bottle of glue or anything like that. No, just take a general inventory and say, okay, I have 6 boxes of wool. I have a shoebox full of little acrylic paints. I have these kinds of glue, right? Just know what you have. That's the first thing. Don't worry about how much. Just know what you generally have. Don't worry about organizing it either. I mean, if you want to, you can, but that's a huge endeavor. So just take a stock and say, well, I have these kinds of things. And maybe doing that, you'll figure out, there's a bunch of stuff here that I don't want or I don't want to use right now. And maybe I'm going to get rid of it. But don't worry about that either. Just think about what you have. Okay, so make a pile of all the books and, write down the ones that are your favorites if that's what you want to do. But just first, figure out what you've got. Okay, and some people, and I'm guilty of this, don't have everything in one place. So I'm pretty lucky because I have my studio here, but I know a lot of people have storage issues for their stuff. So they'll have, this kind of thing over in a closet or that kind of thing out in the garage. take an inventory of everything that you've got, okay? And just write it down generally, not super detailed, just a general list. I have fabric, I have paint, I have thread, whatever, okay? So then you want to think about the kinds of things that you have that are specialized to your art or craft form. Maybe you have a set of special tools that, maybe you saved a lot of money, or maybe it's just something that nobody else is ever going to use unless they're doing your special thing, okay? If you have special tools and special materials like, chemicals or something like that, you need to make a note of that, because if you've got a ton of quilting fabric, everybody knows what that is, and it's easy to find a new home with it. But if you have specialized gizmo, whatchamacallit, that only 6 people in the country use, that's going to be a little bit trickier to find a new home for it in the future, okay? You also need to think about what might require special handling. So that's something like the painters. You have to think about that. Do you have stuff that's flammable? Do you have things that you shouldn't put this thing next to that thing? Right? So a lot of people, they'll work with acids and they'll work with bases, and you should not store the two things together, right? You might have a bunch of things that are flammable. If you work with oil paint, you have all different kinds of solvents. A lot of people work with epoxies. These things require special storage and special handling, and maybe you've got it in a special place now, which is great, but you need to write down what that special scenario is for that set of goodies, because the next person might not know. Okay, and so that comes into what requires specialized disposal. We don't think about it, but often a lot of the things that you go to the big box store, you're going to Michael's or Walmart or whatever, and you're buying that little bottle of paint or that little bottle of glue, really, you shouldn't chuck it when it's gone. Those kinds of things have to be disposed of properly. So if you have a set of things that require that, you should make a list of those things, okay? It's also important to think about things that have a certain shelf life, because sometimes you'll buy something and it's shelf stable, but if you mix it up in a certain way, it's only going to last 3 weeks, 6 months, a year. So if you have these things, maybe it's time to think about disposing of them if they're old and icky. But then what if something happens to you and the next person comes along and they don't know, okay? So think about all those things that require some special situation. And I'm going to say, people don't often think of this, but fabrics fall into that category as well. Wool requires special storage. You have to do special things for that, okay? And nobody thinks about that. It's not like wool is going to suddenly disintegrate or burst into flames, but we do have the issues with bugs, and we do have a lot of issues with lint. So it does require a special situation, and that's something that maybe the next person who comes along needs to know. Okay. So then once you have that general inventory and then that list of special scenarios, whatever it is, we're going to talk about the next step. If you decide to get rid of your stuff, where is it going to go? And if something happens to you and then somebody else has that job, what can we do to help them find a new home for it? So that's going to be part 4, the new home for the stash. And maybe it'll be next week. You're going to go through your stuff, do an inventory, and decide, I don't want this stuff anymore. Or hopefully it's going to be many, many years from now. You've done lots of great artwork, but then it's time to pass stuff on to the next generation of creators. So until next week, take that inventory, at least start, okay? And don't feel bad about it. You've got a lot of great stuff, and maybe you're going to revisit some of it for the first time in years. And that's fun too, okay? So feel good about it. Take that inventory, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.